The next step we're going to do here is we're going to create a new file to describe one item in our list here, and also what the data will be used for on the details view. So let's go ahead here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new group, and I'm just going to call this one models. Whoops, come on Xcode, there we go, models. And so since this is one singular item, I'm going to create a new file. It's just going to be a basic Swift file. It's just going to be a struct that describes our piece of data here from one row on the list. And I'm going to call this one item. All right, it's just one item. So in here, I'm going to create a new struct. And this struct has to be hashable. So we are going to give this the name of item, right? Our struct is going to be called item. And it's going to conform to hashable. Okay, there we go. Now the next step is we want to define the properties that we want in our data here. And since this is a struct, we don't need to use vars. These aren't going to change. So we're going to use let. So I'm just going to say let item name, right? And it's going to be of type string, and let item date of a type date. And that's it. Okay, we're just going to save that. That is all we need here. This is what describes our singular piece of data for each of the rows and the details that will be displayed. So for example, on the first screen on the list, we're going to show the name. You're going to tap the name, go to the details screen, and you're going to see the name and the date. Actually, I got that. Sorry, there we go. Date. Okay. Now the next thing that we need is, obviously we're going to have more than one of these items. So we need somewhere that we can store a collection of these items, right? And that's going to be, the clue is in the name right there. Is just to make this easy as we're working through this, I'm going to create a new model here. I'm just going to say new file. And again, it's going to be a Swift file. And I'm going to call this one item list, right? So we know this is the list of the items, right? This is going to be the collection of the data here. So I'm just going to go create. Now in this one, this is not going to be a struct. We're going to make this a class because the data in here is going to be changing, right? This is where our collection of data for the list is going to be stored, and that of course is going to be changing as you work through your application. You're going to be editing data, adding it, removing it, and so on. This is also the place where we're going to have the application watching for that data change inside this class, right, inside our list, to tell the SwiftUI views, hey, you need to re-render yourself, right? You've got updated data. We want you to go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a class, and I'm just going to call this item list, right? Just so it's very verbose as we're working through this. Now, again, the clue here is this is the place that the rest of our application is going to be watching. So this needs to be observable by the rest of our application. And we're going to go with observable object. If you look down here, right, you'll see in the description, a type alias for the combined frameworks type for an object with a publisher that emits before the object has changed. Yep, that's what we need, right? So we're just going to create our class. So what's going to be inside this class? Well, first of all, we're going to put in just a very basic init for the class, right? And I'm going to leave that blank. We'll get to that in a minute. I want to put the structure in here first. I also want a function to add an item to the class, right? So it's going to have properties. We're going to put some arguments there eventually, but we're just going to leave it like this now. I'm just fleshing out the basics, and we'll come back as we work through this. Now, we may also, at a future date, want to remove items, modify them, and so on, but I just want to give you the basics to get started here. So I'm going to add another function, and I'm going to call this get item list. This is the function we're going to call on our list screen, right, on our content view, to get the full, give me all the data you've got, every item, and so I can work through in a loop and display it. So that's what that's going to be there, all right? Okay, we'll go ahead and save that. Now there is one other very important thing we need to do here as we're defining these. We need a property that can be observed within this item list class. So in other words, what we need something that's going to publish out to the rest of our application, hey, my data has changed. I know some of you are observing me, and you need to go ahead and re-render your screens. Okay. Now, again, the clue is in the name there. We're going to put @published, and this one, a type alias for the combined frameworks type that publishes a property marked with an attribute. Okay. So now what we do is we're going to give a property name like you normally would. So since this one will change, okay, we're going to put in here our container that will hold the list of data. So we're going to say public var, and I'm just going to say that this is the item list. Notice that I'm putting in lowercase I there, right? We've got an uppercase on the class, a lowercase here on the variable. Now, this one is going to be an array. I'm just going to keep this simple, and it's going to be an array. So we need to tell it the type, right? Don't really want to rely on type inference in here in SwiftUI. I want to make sure that this is explicit so it helps me as I debug it. Well, what it's going to be is an array of the item that we created here. It's an array of the items, right? So it's going to be of a type item, okay? That struct that we created up here a minute ago. Now, I'm just going to initialize it to an empty array for now, okay? This is the basic structure we need here, right? Everything else as we go through and fill in the details is really the semantics of making this work. This is the basics of what we need. We've got a class that we can observe, and in there is a property, a published property, that's going to broadcast to the rest of our application as the data changes, right? So the key part here is going to be the rest of our app is going to be working with this item list. It'll make sense as we go through this. All right, that is the basic setup for getting our data structures here. We're going to move on to the next section.